He's one of the most radical designers in modern fashion history, a man who dismantled fashion to reveal its truth. His brand never stood for glamour, it stood for what lies beneath, for lining, threads and tears, for everything that others hide. He made the unfinished his symbol. He showed that beauty does not lie in perfection, but in the courage to show the unfinished. His clothes looked as if they were in the process of being created, but that was precisely where their power lay. They were honest, they were raw, they were real. He had models cover their faces because it was not the person that was important, but the work. He turned anonymity into luxury, silence into his language, white into his signature. He never spoke or rarely, but every seam told a story. He showed that fashion is not superficial, but truth in fabric, and that is the art of the unfinished. In this video, you'll see how Margiela deconstructed fashion, and why his philosophy tells you more about creativity than any fashion degree. I'm Michael, and fashion designer and entrepreneur. I have worked for brands such as Rick Owens, Haider Ackermann and Valentino. With my platform You, I help creative minds build their own brands, even without prior experience in design or fashion. But today we're talking about a designer who has had a profound influence on me, one who showed that imperfection is the true luxury. Today we're talking about Martin Margiela, why his absence made him more famous than any advertising campaign, and what you can learn from this if you work in a creative field yourself. Martin Margiela was no ordinary designer. He was an architect of the invisible. He was born in Belgium in 1957 and studied at the Royal Academy in Antwerp. After graduating, he worked for Jean-Paul Gaultier in Paris, where he also built trust, a time when he learned a lot about craftsmanship and provocation. But while others sought fame, he was drawn to silence. In 1988, he founded his own label with Glenn Martens, Maison Margiela, a house, not a name, a thoughtful and new concept instead of a big ego. From the beginning, it was clear. He never wanted you to see him or for him to be the center of attention. He wanted you to see fashion differently and be free from normality. He didn't talk about his work, but left room for interpretation. He didn't give interviews and refused to be photographed. He never appeared on the catwalk, not even after the show, to address his audience. Because for him, it wasn't the designer that counted, but the idea and even the team that helped create his collection. He slowed down the fashion system, he questioned everything that fashion was supposed to be, and created something that the industry has never forgotten. His philosophy was simple: idea over designer, concept over consumption, fashion as an experiment, as a mirror, as a question. He simply disappeared at some point, but his influence can still be seen today in every visible seam, in every honest form, in every brand that dares to think differently. Margiela believed that you have to take something old apart before you can create something new. He literally turned clothes inside out. He showed seams, linings, chalk marks, and basting threads. He made visible what other designers hid. For him, a seam was not a technical detail. It was a statement, a symbol of honesty that made the work process visible. He used old fabrics, second-hand clothing, and vintage materials to create something new. He gave forgotten and used items a second meaning, long before sustainability became a trend. His shows took place in locations that had nothing to do with luxury, in warehouses, on playgrounds, or in backyards. He invited his guests in a completely new way, without using much glamour. He wanted to show that true beauty lies in the honesty of the process, not in the glamour of the result. In an industry that thrives on names, Margiela erased his own. No face, no interviews, no self-image. His label remained anonymous. Just 4 white stitches on blank fabric. No logos, no advertising, no self-promotion. Those 4 stitches became his trademark. Only insiders knew it was a Margiela product as soon as they saw the 4 stitches on the back. Not to show himself, but to disappear. He wanted the work to speak, not the creator. That's why his studio wore white coats, everyone the same, no one more important than the idea. He made himself invisible and became unforgettable as a result. Margiela always asked questions where others simply wanted to sell. What happens when a dress is deliberately incomplete? When a blazer loses its shoulder or even emphasizes it too much? When luxury loses its perfection? His fashion was not a presentation, it was interpretation. After Margiela's retirement in 2009, things quieted down at the fashion house and the studio created its collections. But quiet does not mean stagnation. 5 years later, in 2014, John Galliano took over as creative director. A man who was the exact opposite of Margiela. Where Margiela whispered, Galliano spoke in colors, shapes, theater. For many, this came as a shock. How could a designer who stood for excess lead a house known for silence? But Galliano understood that Margiela's spirit did not lie in minimalism, but in freedom and a concept. He brought emotion to the construction. He transformed the studio into a stage, but left the 4 white seams untouched. The white remained, only the light changed. His collections told stories of fragility, identity, and people reinventing themselves. He adapted the brand to a new generation. He combined deconstruction with drama, silence with theater. And that is precisely what made Galliano's time so important. He proved that Margiela cannot be imitated, but can be interpreted. Galliano led the house into a new era of emotion. He opened the door so that Margiela's philosophy could speak to the times again, but fashion never stands still, and Galliano left the house in 2024. In 2025, a new chapter begins for the brand. Belgian designer Glenn Martens is taking over the creative reins at Martin Margiela and Diesel. Both brands belong to the OTB group, which also includes brands such as Victor and Rolf, Jill Sander and Amiri. Martens brings technology, humor and street influences to the house, a new generation that translates Margiela's principles into a digital future. He remains faithful to the white studio but adds something new: pace, technology, transparency. He understands that Margiela's legacy is not nostalgia, but a way of thinking. Personally, I find that Glenn Martens still speaks and models too much in Galliano's language, but perhaps it will take time for him to implement Martin Margiela's DNA. Nevertheless, his work shows that deconstruction can also be digital, anonymity can also be loud, and authenticity always remains timeless. The new era of Martin Margiela shows that change is not betrayal. Galliano gave the invisible a face, Martens is now giving it a future, and that is precisely the lesson for you as a creative person. Your brand doesn't have to change because you are uncertain, but because you are growing. Stay true to your core but let your light transform. That is true continuity. Each piece told a story, raw, honest, and human. He took the familiar and exposed it. And he showed that what appears incomplete is often the most complete thing of all. Margiela didn't just change fashion, he showed what happens when you dare to be imperfect, and this is where your part of the story as a fashion designer begins. Lesson 1. Perfection is predictable, imperfection is real. When you work creatively, what you call mistakes are often what make you unique. Margiela made this his style. He showed his seams, let fabrics fray, and that's what made him unmistakable. The same is true for your brand. Your imperfection is your signature. It shows courage and it creates identity, your own signature. Lesson 2. Margiela never wanted to be a star. He wanted to create. In a world that screams, he chose silence and became louder than everyone else. When you remove your ego, you create space for your idea. When you stop putting yourself on display, you can finally focus on what matters: your work, your message, your brand. Lesson 3. Margiela took existing things apart to create something new. He sewed inside out, broke with conventions, and found something that fashion had never seen before. That is the core of all creative progress, the courage to destroy the familiar. Ask yourself, what can you take apart in your work to rethink it? What is holding you back that you should actually let go of? When you start deconstructing, you start creating. Martin Margiela proved you don't need a stage to make an impact. You don't need followers to influence. All you need is attitude, courage, and an idea that is bigger than your ego. He showed that creativity doesn't have to be loud to be heard. He showed that true branding comes from creating honestly, without fear, without masks, without filters. If you feel that you have a creative idea that finally wants to see the light of day, but you don't know where to start, now is the right moment. At you'll find knowledge, tools, and a community to accompany you on your journey. I'll show you how to build a brand from your vision, just as Margiela turned imperfection into art. Subscribe to this channel if you want to learn more about creative brands, design processes, and the journey from idea to product. Next, watch the video, How Rick Owens Steadfastly Markets His Brand with One Collection. Because your first step doesn't have to be perfect, it has to be real.